Well, my name is Molly Clevin, and I'm with the University of Minnesota Duluth Alumni Relations team. Today, we are taking a behind the scenes look at the Book of the North project and learning about the students, faculty, and research that are bringing it to life. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Alumni Relations website. You will receive an email with the link once it's ready. Finally, we will have time at the end of the presentation to answer live questions. To submit a question, use the question and answer button on the bottom of your screen. Now to introduce our guest. Today we will hear from Dr. Krista Sue-Lo Twu. Dr. Twu is an associate professor of English at UMD and the UMN Imagine Fund Arts, Humanities, and Design Chair. She earned her PhD in English with a specialty in medieval religious literature and is leading a group of artists, scholars, and scientists in the Book of the North project. It is now my pleasure to welcome and hand it over to Dr. Twu.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to see so many people, some familiar faces, some new people. I will hop straight into the presentation so that we have plenty of time for questions and for me to walk you around the new book lab at UMD. So I'll share my screen and we will go. All right. There we are. Can everybody see that all right? Yep. Okay. So, hi. I'd like to introduce you to my project called the Book of the North. It's a it's a 2-year-long project in which we're building a book from scratch. And you can see in our title slide here that I have drawn a map of the greater Minnesota area in which we're working. We're working with just an enormous team of people, and I'll introduce you to some of those in just a moment. But I wanted to say that it's a great partnership between the UMD campus, the Natural Resources Research Institute, the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus, the University of Minnesota Land Arboretum, the Duluth Fiber Guild, so many people and places are involved. So you can see this is where we're finding the things that we need to make the book. I want to say thanks especially to the Imagine Fund for supporting arts, humanities, and design at the University of Minnesota. Without this, we wouldn't be doing this. Well, maybe we'd still be doing this project, but we wouldn't be doing it as quickly and with as much panache. So here we are with the Book of the North, imagining the past and planning for the future. The main takeaway I'd love for everybody to get from this presentation is that a book is a community. And in being present for this and being interested in this work, you're part of our community. Every book, whether you're reading it on paper or online, is still an object that's been touched by many hands. I know sometimes we have the tendency to think about books as being, oh, it's a set of ideas that are in words that, maybe the words are just out there on the internet, maybe the words are on a page, but it doesn't really matter what the package is. I think in my classes on book history and culture, I really like to push against that and to open up the idea that the participants in a book include the editors, obviously, the audiences, obviously, as well as the writer, but also all the people that made it possible for those words to be distributed to those readers, to those audiences. So, even if you're reading an ebook, you're still using a reader to do it. Maybe it's a Kindle, maybe it's your computer, but somebody made that. So thinking about the condition of a book as a made object is really kind of where we are in this project. Scientists, scholars, artists from across the region are coming together to bring the past to life, sure, but also to raise awareness about the current ecological and cultural challenges and opportunities that we are facing in our region and across the world. And hopefully this will inspire future leaders to learn from the past and engage with the land for a more sustainable future. On this slide, you can also see a little sample of what the text is going to look like. We're making this book entirely by hand, from the fibers to the inks to the binding materials to the covers of the book, and all the decorations and the inks in it. It's a participatory project, and participants will help provide historical texts, scientific analysis. Participants have helped cultivate the flax, break and strip the fibers, make the paper. The resulting book is going to embody both the frailty and also the resilience of our special spot in the Northland. Part of where I come to for this project is as a medieval literary historian. I studied a lot of religious literature when I was in grad school, but I also got a credential in paleography and codicology at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And it's there that I started to think about manuscripts as time capsules and a living witness. Sometimes it's easy to think about manuscripts as, oh, they're old books, right? They're hard to read. They're a little bit inaccessible. You have to go to a manuscript library. Maybe you have to get special permission to see it. But more and more of these books are available through these beautiful presentations in digital archives and things like that. So more books from the Middle Ages are being able to be read by more people than ever before, notwithstanding the tragic ransomware attack that the British Library is still suffering under. And that's really taken a big chunk of our digital access offline, but there's still an amazing amount of work that's available. It's also helping bring us together in terms of manuscript studies to think about these moments of production, to think about the manuscript as a package for the text that tells a story about the way that people used that text, who might have used it. The text itself has always given us insight into the culture, the language, the religion, and the values of the society that produced it, and also the societies that have embraced these texts, that have interpreted them, that have kept them alive in their literary and language cultures. But the manuscript itself, that package made out of parchment and boards or paper and ink, it's a technology, and it tells us about the engineering and the technological capabilities of a society in terms of the way that book, that codex, as we call it, has been constructed. The paleographic conditions and opportunities, as well as limitations of the script itself, and the structural preconditions that make these books possible. Like when you start to regress into what do you need before you can start to write something, you start saying, oh, well, it's better to do that inside than outside. So now maybe I need to build a house, or at least a shelter. It's better to do it on a desk, even if it's a lap desk, than it is to make a codex on the floor or without some sort of support. So you start thinking about that. What do you need in terms of of time when you yourself, scribe, are not farming. Um, so there's certain types of social conditions and structural conditions that you need for books. Um, you need materials, and the materials themselves, the substrata, which is, say, the thing that you're writing on, whether it's a clay tablet or it's a piece of parchment or a piece of paper or papyrus, the things that you're writing using to make the ink, the binding materials that you're tying it all together with, these tell you a lot about the economic conditions, the trade and imports that the society is able to engage in, the resources that it has or that it can get. And finally, at the end of that process, you have an insight into so many things about the place, the time, the people that made it through the traces, the residues, the biology of the parchment, right? The animals that made the parchment, the plants that made the paper. Um, but you also get some interesting insights into the residues that the readers left behind. So this is part of a new field that we call biocodicology, and it's had some really interesting and very promising new research. The Folger Shakespeare Library is swabbing its collection for genetic traces from, like, skin particles and hair particles that end up in the books, so we can see who's been using them, right, over the centuries. I have a little piece of a manuscript from the Wellcome collection in London, and it's from the Wellcome's manuscript number 632. And so the right side of it, that's what rectum means. And this is part of a birth girdle, which I will say that UMD's own Mary Morse alumni, right? UMD's own alumni, Mary Morse, has written a marvelous book on these birth girdles. So if you want to know more about birth girdles, please look up Dr. Mary Morse's book on English birth girdles. This is one of the girdles that she studies, and there's been some more and interesting biocodicological research on it, because, like, you're like, what's a birth girdle? A birth girdle, it's a long, thin piece of parchment that medievals used to use as part of their medical science for childbirth. Um, Pregnancy was very, very dangerous for them. And as you can see, there's writing, there's pictures. Um, these birth girdles had prayers and incantations. They had poems. They had pictures of saints. Everything that they could do to help a woman who was in one of the most dangerous portions of her life when she was pregnant and giving birth. One of the things that we didn't really know about birth girdles is how exactly they were using them. Like, do you put them over your clothes? Do you put them under your clothes? Do you actually wear them when you're actually giving birth? One of the things that the biocodicological research on this helped us figure out is that, yes, they are using them when they were giving birth, because these stains that you see on this particular portion of it um, represent some of the, let us call them, unspeakable effluvia of the childbirth process. And if any of you have given birth or witnessed giving birth, you know there's a lot of effluvia involved. So they found these actual, effluvia, like bodily effluents on these birth girdles. They found also the residues of like the medieval pharmacon for remedies in childbirth, salves and medicines. So we know now, because of this, we know that whoever's using this birth girdle had some of the most cutting edge technology and resources that were available to pregnant women at the time. We hope it helped her. We hope to help them because they would be used and passed down, incredibly valuable objects. So this is a real insight into an elite woman's childbirth history, and perhaps her family as well. So this is the sort of thing that the Book of the North will help tell the story of in future centuries. What it's made out of, who made it. And in that respect, I'd just like to quickly introduce some of my team members. Like I said, scientists like Dr. Elizabeth Austin Miner, who lends us her expertise in chemistry and biochemistry. She's a geochemist from MIT and does this great research in organic biogeochemistry. She's looking at microplastics in particular right now, and will help us frame up questions to ask about our materials and the types of chemical inputs that we see in them, chemicals that are coming in from the environment. Dr. Brianna Gross, who's a professor of biology with us, and she's helping us study the plant genetics of the situation because we're making all of our paper from local and locally sourced plant material. She particularly studies the difference between wild and domesticated plants, and that's something that we're really representing in the paper in the Book of the North. Louise Young, a botanist and ecologist. Also, she writes novels, and she won't tell me their titles, so I got to find her novels. But she's our expert in bast fibers and all of their uses and their histories. She's got more than 20 years of experience processing, spinning, and weaving these bast fibers, and has studied indigenous fiber arts on 3 continents. We're so fortunate to have her as one of our community partners. And once we're finished getting those fibers into shreds, Mary Hark, who is professor of design studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and who has a paper making studio in St. Paul, Minnesota, will be making these into paper for us. And she really specializes in these editions of high quality bast fiber papers. So I will show you a sample of those when I walk you around my lab. Dr. Abby Clark-Sather is helping us shred those in her patented textile shredder that we have. So another great partner in our engineering department. Alex Corte, another UMD graduate and medievalist at Concordia University, is going to, and well, has made the parchment materials from white-tailed deer that was harvested in upper Minnesota, to provide the cover on the boards that will be the bindings for the Book of the North. You can see him with his good girl and helper. A special shout out to our partner, Dr. Jay Austin, who's professor of physics here at UMD. He's an MIT trained physicist, but he's also a woodworker and engineer. And Jay's building all of the tools that we need to build the things that we will build the book with. So there are a lot of intermediate tools that end up being necessary for this. And you can see him hard at work in his brand new workshop. There's lots of other things that happened as well. And as you can see, in fall of 25, we primarily were growing and gathering materials. Through winter and spring, we've been involved in the production and analysis of these things. Summer and fall, we're going to be doing the layout and the inscription for the Book of the North. Into spring of 2027, where we'll be holding an exhibition at the Tweed Museum, starting in February and running through June. So I hope I'll be able to come and see it. in person. The inscription process will be ongoing. So that exhibit is going to be really organized around a writing desk. And in a lot of times you'll be able to come and see me working on the book and doing the calligraphy, and you can ask questions and you can interact with those materials in different ways. We'll keep up the workshops and things like that. So I hope that you'll make a trip to Duluth in spring 2027 for the purposes. I wanted to also introduce our growing team, where we went from plants and we're going to make paper and the binding materials. And this is really a great way to think about book culture in the context of agriculture. In many important ways, all medieval communities were farming communities. And here there's this great picture from the Luttrell Psalter that was made in the 14th century. It's held by the British Library. And you see the work, the connection between fiber, where this woman is making she's making flax string. You see her distaff tucked under her arm with her spindle hanging from it while she's feeding her chickens, her enormous chicken. Um, and here you also see our recent UMD graduate, Sam Volkerstoffer. He was holding the chicken that I knitted for him at the Land Lab, where here student managers Abby Magruder and Justin Chiletti are measuring and preparing the beds to sow the seeds for our flax crop, which takes 90 days from sowing to harvest. So you see in the bottom left corner there are sprouts on June 4th, after we planted it on May 23rd. And the ripe seeds heads that indicate that that flax is ready for harvest on September 3rd in 2025. And look at our harvest. Students from our nature writing class came out and worked with us. We were able to provide them work gloves and tools, and they cleared about 400 square feet of flax so that we could ripple it and remove the seeds so that we can try to save those seeds for next year's harvest. But taking the seeds off also discourages rodents from nibbling the flax, both in storage and while we ret it. So here we're retting it from early September through mid-October. This is 800 linear feet of flax that is retting. Retting means rotting, actually. And what it's doing is it's using the soil microbes to loosen the bast fibers from the woody stalk of the plant. On the left, you see the oil flax that we grew, and on the right, you see the line flax. And you can see the pronounced morphological differences between them. The oil flax spends most of its energy making seeds, and the line flax spends most of its energy making stalk. So that appears to be a modern differentiation, however, as our plant geneticist tells us. But we saved the seeds, which had been cross-pollinating all summer, to see what features they'll display when we plant them next year. So that's one part of the paper story. The bast fibers, by the way, the fibers that we're using, they're the outside. They're if you're a plant person, you know that the phloem is like the plant's vascular system. And that's actually the bast fiber. It's the plant's vascular system. So it's not the pith inside, it's the bast outside. And for you linguists out there, the word bast comes from a Proto-Indo-European word that means the stuff you make rope with. So bastus. It comes just through Anglo-Saxon. Here you see one of our former students, one of our nature writing students, in the wetlands restoration project at the Natural Resources Research Institute, FENS, that we participated in to gather nettles, which are another source of bast fibers, also to make paper. Thank you very much to our partner, Val Brady, who enabled that particular moment for us. Here's the land lab where we gathered quite a lot of our milkweed, including a volunteer milkweed that put itself inside the high tunnel at the land lab and grew to be 8 feet tall. I don't know if any of you have ever seen an 8-foot milkweed plant, but it was a magnificent specimen. You can see it here with on the left, Sam again, and on the right, our research assistant, Mita Chabaraj. So thank you, Mita, for all your work on this. And then we engaged in a lot of experiential and experimental practices with labor, with language, with storytelling. Just to give you an example of the labor involved in this, it's important to note that in the Middle Ages, in the late Middle Ages, every piece of paper that was made in Europe came from old clothes. So before you get paper, you have to make cloth. And you made cloth from flax, from linen, right? The line fibers make the linen thread. And like, if you think about a square yard of linen cloth with a thread count of like 500 threads, you end up with like 1,000 yards of thread. There's 100 plants per square foot and about 100 square feet of land to grow those 10,000 flax plants that it takes to make a square yard of linen cloth. So this is a massive undertaking to make cloth. And the cloth trade undergirds all of the book trade in the late Middle Ages. It's the choke point for bookmaking. I recently read a little piece by one of the early American writers, Courvoisier, who was talking about in the 18th century how essentially they're running out of rags to make paper and they need to find out more things to make paper with. So it's not until the 18th century that people are starting to try to make paper from virgin fibers. So for all those years, let's call it, the 15th through the 18th century in Europe, 300 years, it's all old clothes. So whenever you touch an old book, you're touching somebody's old clothes. When you saw the first folio that was here in Duluth in 2016, that was a whole pile of old clothes. I always think it's moving to think of the people who wore those clothes before they became paper. Like I said, our language has a lot of references to working flax, from the bast terminology, right? That means rope, to the metaphors when we talk about your flaxen-haired maidens or your tow-headed children or spinning straw into gold or even heckling. All these come from flax work. And as you can see in the bottom picture there, that's how you heckle flax, is you draw it through these sharp nails. And the people who heckled flax for a living essentially stood around like beating flax into these golden strands, right? Spinning that straw into that very, very valuable fiber that then you could spin into thread for even more valuable cloth. But they would talk to each other and gossip and like share their hot takes all day long. And our term for heckling comes from that. We also have our narratives about Sleeping Beauty, who, no, she didn't prick her finger on the spinning wheel. There's no needles on spinning wheels. But when you spin flax, the fibers themselves will drive the force of the wheel will drive those splinters into your hands. Every time I spin flax on a spinning wheel, I end up with like, I don't know, 20 splinters that I have to pick out of my hands. Stories like Rumpelstiltskin, right, spinning straw into gold. And the narrative of the hateful flax spinning, or the three flax spinners, in which it's a story about how working flax, it changes your body. It will give you, that big foot and that torn up lip and that torn up thumb, which I very much have the torn up thumb now. I call myself now, I'm the thumb crone from the hateful flax spinning story. We're making paper with that. These bast fibers that we cultivated from flax, that we removed the invasive species of nettles, and that we harvested when the plant was done, right? The milkweed that we used. And mind you, again, it's the milkweed stalk fibers. It's not the coma from the seed pods, although those are also a very useful fiber. And in World War II, they used to stuff life preservers with them. So lots of uses for the milkweed. We had workshops in bookbinding, and we'll have more workshops in bookbinding. I hope you can join us for another one in the early fall, right? So the bindings that we're going to bind the Book of the North from are also made from that flex fiber that I'll be plying to 18-3 linen thread, and then sewing the quires and making the warp for the end bands, and single plying linen thread for the weft on the end bands that both reinforce and decorate the spine on the book. So you can see part of our work in our workshop, students learning how to bind a quire. We made ink with walnuts for brown ink, with buckthorn for a blue, a green, and a yellow ink. There's iron gall that made black ink. Tansy or bitter button makes a beautiful shiny gold ink. I'm still working on the copper carbonate that makes the verdigris. Yeah, I've run some technical difficulties, but I believe in us. We're going to make verdigris. And then iron oxide that forms the red from hematite that we find in the rocks from the Iron Range, as well as like everywhere else in the world. It's a very, very common pigment, but it's very beautiful. So you can see during our making workshop that we were doing that. And also we made iron gall ink from a medieval ink recipe using local oak galls. And you can see this is the recipe that we're using from the United Kingdom's National Archives. This particular document is kept in the Tower of London's archives, and it tells us about how to make ink. So these are some of the oak gall samples. If you start to the left and go clockwise, you'll see oak galls from Aleppo, which the medievals favored because they actually have a higher gallic acid content and make a darker ink. But we also have a sample from one of our friends and partners in Bloomington, Indiana, who brought some oak galls for us from her forest. We've got most of our stash of oak galls comes from the U of M Land Arboretum in Chasta, Minnesota. And then some of the other oak galls that we gathered in Hartley, which are very papery, and it took a lot of them to make any significant amount of acid from that. But you can see how pretty that ink is when you write with it for iron gall ink. When we made it in my class, the class had a great time. It's like alchemy. You mix these three things together, none of which are black, and then you have black ink. So, and you watch it change colors like right in front of you. We also have a quill project going on with one of our students, Paul Wong, a chemical engineering undergrad, just graduated, who's studying the optimal annealing method for curing quills. And a project that also just recently finished up that I don't have all the pictures from yet, about the pH changes in that buckthorn ink. Also with University of Minnesota chemistry students. So here at UMD. So, here's a little sample of the calligraphy that we're using. We've had medieval calligraphy workshops, and we will continue having those through next year. We're using Textura Quadrata, Batarda, Humanus, and Cancelleresca Formata, or as we call it, italic. So keep an eye out. You can see little examples of all of those if you go to our blog and at thebookofthenorth.com and see all those things that are, that my research assistant wrote some articles on. We also have to say that the going is the goal, right? We have some upcoming events that are free and open to the public, including this event right now. But also Friday and Saturday of this week, if you happen to be in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and would like to stop by and check out our wool spinning workshop at the International Congress on Medieval Studies, yeah, you have to be a registered participant in the conference to actually spin with us, but you can certainly come watch if you just happen to be in Michigan at the time. But we will have more spinning workshops here at UMD. We had one a little bit early, well, just a few weeks ago in the spring, and it was a wild success. Fiber Guild came out in spades for it. It was great. And then through the summer, we're going to be processing wool, and you're like, what's going to be wool in the book? The lining for the box that will be sort of like the archival storage unit for the book is going to be lined in local wool that's processed from some of our local sheep here. So we will be processing a full fleece, from fleece to yarn, over the course of, like, I don't know, a series, let's call it, of events that you are very welcome to come participate in. Please keep an eye on our calendar and our Instagram and other social media sites for when those are going to happen. We'll be having more medieval calligraphy, more paper making, a sewing bee to make book snakes for our display cases. Please follow us on social media and check out our website. If you click on that QR code, it'll bring you to like a menu of things to choose from. Like and share, as we say, like and share. As an extremely offline person, it always makes me want to barf a little bit when I say that, but truly, it's a great way to keep up with the project. Finally, I want to just say that we are part of a really exciting new, I think, like, wing of medieval studies that's called Maker Medievalism. That thinks about, that studies technologies of knowing. We engage in experimental archaeology. We theorize the embodiments and materialities of the Middle Ages and do engage research practices and pedagogies. You can find more about it and our team of scholars that are working primarily in Europe through Oxford and the University of London. At the Guild of Medievalist Makers, there's a website, guildmedmac.com, that you can visit. And I would like to especially say thank you again to the University of Minnesota and the Institute for Advanced Study that has just awarded us a grant for the Liberal Artisan that should keep the programming that we have from the Book of the North going into the next year and a half, right? As we say, commune vinculum omnibus artibus, or in English, a common bond for all the arts. It's the slogan of the University of Minnesota Regents. And we want to bring that particular slogan to life through the Liberal Artisan. We'll be having so many more hands-on workshops, thinking about the labor practices of the pre-modern world and how that can help us think about our embodied materialities of the present, how it can help us cultivate research and teaching, integrate in material and experiential methods. We're going to have reading groups, symposia, a curriculum development workshop. We are hoping to develop skills and expertise among U of M faculty and staff and students in production technologies, in these crafts and these materials. We'll be working with local practitioners and arts and labor organizations. We really want to resist the contemporary forces of alienation, disembodiment, and social fragmentation by creating these spaces like the Book of the North, right? Like the Book of the North is a space, is a community that can holistically and collaboratively address these material, conceptual, and societal challenges. So thank you again for being here. I hope that you'll continue to follow with us. I'm going to stop my sharing now, and we can all come back together.
Well, thank you so much, Krista, for sharing. We are now moving into our Q&A portion of the webinar. So if you have questions that we can answer live here, feel free to use the box and submit your questions. We did have a few come in through the registration, so I think we'll start there. The first question asks, what are some challenges and rewards of leading this project?
Working with this giant team that is spread out all across the state of Minnesota is a distinct challenge, but it's also the most rewarding part. Building a community through all the people that we've met is so rewarding. One of the amazing things, so like when I ended up, like hip deep in water, cold water in a steady drizzle at the fens in the middle of September last year, like pulling nettles out of the fens. And I wondered, oh dear, what has happened to my life? When I spent like all summer long, like doing the really physically very demanding work of farming that flax, I thought to myself, now look here, Twu, you literally got a PhD, so you would never have to farm again. But what has happened? Like farming is really hard. Agricultural labor is really hard. But it's also super rewarding. So like the challenge is the reward. And also like the milkweed. Oh my gosh. Finding the milkweed, getting access to the spot where the milkweed is, where like you can't take a car into, like it's been a continual process of problem solving, of engineering. How do you make a flax break? Because we need like many more flax breaks than we had when we started to process all that flax. Like it was like, oh, I know how to process flax. You take a break and you break it, and then you do these hackle it. And Louise looks at me and says, how much flax do you have? How many people are coming to process flax? Yeah, we only have one break. Let's make some more breaks. I was like, oh yeah, we need to make those. So, it's just a continual process of discovery, of engineering solutions to problems. And every week over the course of the fall, after we've had workshops and talks and things like that, somebody would walk up to me out of nowhere with like 6 stalks of milkweed and say, here, I pulled these out of my garden. I want you to have them. And I'd be like, thank you, because we need all the milkweed we can get. Every once in a while, just another pile of milkweed would end up sitting on my front porch. It's like, who left? The milkweed fairy was here. And just to think of like all of those people who brought me their milkweed, and they're all part of the Book of the North, right? All those students who came and harvested flax, they're part of the book. If you came and looked at the ink that we were making when we made ink that day, you're part of the Book of the North. Everybody here is part of the Book of the North. So really, the going's the goal, and the community is the best part. It's absolutely the best part of it. But the other great reward that I got out of this project and getting truly a very large grant. The Imagine grant gave me $100,000 to make this. $100,000 for arts and humanities funding is it's an embarrassing lot of money. But what it's helped us do is get all the equipment that we need, make the equipment that we need, acquire it, source things, and move into this beautiful, beautiful space. Can I show my lab? Can I
Please.
do that?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna stop this video. And if you want, when you see my lab video come online here, you can pin that. So if you go to those three, if you scroll over that particular screen and you see those three dots in the blue, and you can say pin, right? Click on that and pin it. It will be big for you. So I'm gonna walk us around and show you what I've got going on in the book lab. So first of all, here this is my new workstation, which is not just a desk, but also a tilting writing light table, drafting table. So we can do a lot of really intensive layout on this, and it's so great. Here is another workspace, again, with a glass drafting table so that we can backlight things and do, and use it as a light table as well. One of these is going to be the table that the Book of the North exhibition in the Tweed in 2027 will be organized against. Here you can see the milkweed that I'm still, all that milkweed, and the nettles that I'm still stripping. We have the seeds from the flax that we saved for sewing, and oh gosh, this is one of my spinning wheels that I'm spinning some wool on for a practiced project. It's a little bit of a side quest. So we see our flax breaks and our milkweed fiber, our flax fiber. Over here, oh, and we've got this great big board. If you want to learn more about the Book of the North, you can click on the QR code. Just like and share. So you can see this has been a great place to have students come in and learn things about page imposition, about layout, about scripts. I visited the hemp lab in Wisconsin. Shout out to the hemp lab. We have a photo and scanning station. This is a beautiful antique spinning wheel that I'm refurbishing so that we can use it to spin. I want to show you this. See that tiny aperture in that spinning wheel? That means that it was meant for flax. She's a big, fast girl, though, so I am not actually good enough at spinning flax to do it on that one. I spin most of my flax on this one. And this is a beautiful antique flax spinning wheel. Again, teeny tiny aperture. That Amy Brown, UMD archivist, donated to this project. It was her grandmother's, I believe. And you can see I've spun, this is some tow fiber that I've spun. And this is going to be the weft So the cross threads in the bookbinding materials. You can see some of the things that Jay Austin has built for us, like this warping board and these hackles. We have, we're developing a library for making paper, ink, all sorts of things. The lab chickens are watching you. We have our ink making supplies and stations and the biggest mortar and pestle in the world for grinding up all those oak galls. You can see, I mean, again, it's the community. When one of my friends' sons, who's a hunter, heard about, like, we're using quills, he brought me these beautiful turkey quills that he had taken, from turkeys he had taken when he was hunting to use as quills, and they're just spectacular. So yeah, we've got all this stuff. Here's a sample piece of the linen paper that will comprise most of the Book of the North. It has not been sized yet, but it's really beautiful with its little deckled edge. Oops. Yeah. So elsewhere, we have a 19-inch guillotine style paper cutter that needs a small repair. And we have a jobbing press that students have been using to learn about editing, and like there's so many things that you can learn by typesetting a chase and having to proof it and edit it, and really it makes you think of every single decision, because nobody's going to make it happen unless you make it happen. It's things like they'll be setting, well, for instance, we set just recently these chases with these copies of the University of Minnesota alma mater. And, this took them hours and hours to put that little poem, all right, here's another one, into type. And one of the things that kept happening is, like, they'd set it and then they would print it and they'd be like, we misspelled something. Oh, we put the letters in backwards. Oh no, that one's upside down. And they'd redo it. And then they'd feel happy that they got all the text, and I'd come around and ask them, like, hey, are you going to put any punctuation in that? And they're like, oh no. So they take it all apart again and punctuate it. So that's why you have punctuation in this one. It's great. And you can see they made themselves some graduation cards. So inside it says congratulations. So yeah, we've got a little station where we can heat quills and we can make ink. And here's our paper making decals, our type case. We've got a cold storage for ink, no food. And finally, one of the beautiful pieces is our floor loom, where we'll be weaving a lot of the like the book cloth and stuff like that for the Book of the North. Right. Yes, it is taking a very, very large village, as it always has, as it still always does. There's no book that anybody makes on their own. So that is how we're doing here. And I'll turn this video off.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Krista. We do have time for a few more questions. And this question is wondering, kind of, what do you hope the audience or readers will take away from this project? Oh, I think you need to unmute yourself, Krista.
There we go. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, so how, like, what, I mean, I hope that we give people a way to think about literary culture that that embraces the entire community of labor that 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 comes together to make a book. It's not just the author having like a big thought. It's it's like the editor that made the thought sharper. It's it's the design artist that was like, so when we present your book, we're going to use this font instead of that font, right? There's a reason why your textbooks aren't set in like Comic Sans or Papyrus, right? It's like we have people making decisions, and scripts are technologies, right? They have things that they're good at and things that they're bad at. And there's always a compromise on like what script do you use. So somebody had to make that decision. Somebody had to, if it's a paper book, somebody had to make that paper. Yeah, a machine made that paper probably, but somebody had to run the machine. Somebody had to build the machine. It all comes down to an interconnected, like full scale social collaboration. And that's what I so hope that people will get out of the Book of North is how many things have to work together to give us a literary culture. Later on in the future, when we're all gone, though, I also really hope that somebody is going to look at this object and say, who made this? What can we tell about the people who made this based on the materials of the book? One of the important things that we're doing is we're including a list of questions about the ecology and the plant genetics and some of the scientific questions that we actually don't have answers for right now, and hope that future scholars can answer them, right? um and some of them are like my my student teams that just finished their buckthorn ink analysis. One of the things that we don't know, like there's no literature out there that tells us what actual molecule is responsible for buckthorn changing color when you adjust the pH of it. Like we don't know. Nobody's done that yet. It would be difficult to find out. So, maybe future sciences, hey, that would be cool. Like, can you find that out for us? Um, what I'm hoping to have in the book too is a selection of the languages that we speak in the state of Minnesota. So a linguistic representation of all the language communities and cultures of the state of Minnesota. There are a lot. I think this will comprise at least half the book, is just short excerpts in every language of Minnesota that we can lay our hands on, from our indigenous languages up to the newest languages, not just news languages like our newer immigrant groups, like Somali and like Hmong, but like Hmong as a written language is very new. I mean, it's been a language for a long time, and it's a really interesting language isolate. Gosh, Hmong is interesting as a language, but the written language is, was codified in 1987. On the other hand, this portion of the book is hoping to also help us think about who we are, Minnesota, right? We think about, oh, Minnesota's like, it's the Vikings, and we've got Swedes and Finns in Minnesota, such diversity, but it's a really diverse state. Northern Minneapolis school district, there's like 90 languages. that are spoken in homes of the school children in northern Minneapolis. We think about, oh, the German farmers in like New Ulm are like, they're sort of like some of our pioneer uh, workers in Minnesota, and there's a very strong German, uh, you know, I don't know, culture that remains. But the Mexican American community in the southern part of the state came there at the same time. It's just as old as the German American population in Minnesota, right? Just as venerable, has just as much history in the state of Minnesota. So these are things that I want us to capture, and I want us to be able to show to each other, to our present, to our future. Like, who are we?
So when the book is done and finished, where will it live? This is our final question.
Well, it will eventually be in the University of Minnesota Duluth archives, and anybody can make an appointment, and they will fetch it from the archives, and you can page through it and see it. It will not be part of the circulating collection. It will be a unique object. I'm I have set aside money to scan the entirety of it with high quality digital reproduction. So we're working on a digital version of it that you can look at, that you'll be able to look at online also. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and we will be sending a follow-up email with links to everything that was discussed today, as well as a recording of the session. But I just want to thank you so much, Krista, for taking the time and giving us a tour of the lab. Definitely can feel the passion and that sense of community that you were talking about. So thank you so much. And for those of you that this is your first time, we host these behind the scenes about twice a month where we feature just various research, faculty, physical spaces on campus. And so you're welcome to hopefully attend future events. And with that, I just want to thank you again, Krista, and we hope that you'll all join us for future events. Thanks again and have a great day.
Thank you, and go Bulldogs.
Thanks.